I've probably been in 80 fights in 26 years. My nose broke 3 times, 4 concussions, so it can get pretty dangerous.
Dennis O'Neill knew the risks every time he reported for duty at the Green Bay Correctional Institution.
It takes a unique individual to be an officer in a maximum security prison with mass movement like GBCI.
September 8, 2015, O'Neill was working in the prison's social services building. Inmate James Luke had just gone to meet psychologist Dr. Martha Breen.
I heard this eerie sound, so I took off running. Got to an office and saw a psychologist, Dr. Breen, being brutally attacked on the floor of our office, being strangled and hit.
O'Neill jumped on the inmate, who then attacked him.
Before I successfully restrained him, I took several hits to the head, and my scalp was opened up in 3 places from prongs of an adapter.
O'Neill managed to yell into his radio, but found himself in the fight of his life.
I remember not being in any pain, but being in awe of how fast this blood was coming out of my head.
So the blood was coming from you?
From me, dripping, pouring onto his face, and struggling to stay conscious. I remember being so frustrated with myself that I just can't do it.
2 other guards ran in and grabbed James Luke, who court records show was high on drugs, yelling, "I told the security director I was going to beat someone, and this is only the beginning." Luke was transferred from GBCI to Waupun Correctional that day. But Target 2 found the assaults have continued. 6 months after O'Neill's attack, inmate Luke was charged again for throwing bodily fluids on staff at Waupun Correctional. This week, he was moved to Columbia Correctional, his 3rd maximum security prison in 19 months. Target 2 found Luke has a long history of attacks, having been charged a total of 12 times. The first in 2003, when he was 15, charged for assaulting a guard while he was in custody at Lincoln Hills, a juvenile facility in northern Wisconsin that's under fire for poor treatment of inmates. No one knows why he was there because juvenile records are sealed, but his nearly 14-year history of attacking guards is public record. Thousands of people drive by Green Bay Correctional Institution every day, most of us with no idea what's really going on inside these walls.
It's right out of any prison movie you've ever seen.
It's pretty much the way you see it on TV, you know, it's real.
From fights to riots, these 2 former prison guards tell Target 2 they've seen it all.
An inmate sucker punched a captain that I was standing next to, and the captain went down, and then it began. Officers were dropping left and right. We pretty much all went to the hospital that day.
You never know what you're going to encounter. You know, it can be anything.
Both have been injured in fights inmates started. In September 2015, an inmate with a long history of assaulting officers attacked a doctor, then Dennis O'Neill, leaving him with severe injuries and partial memory loss.
I took several hits to the head, and my scalp was opened up in 3 places from prongs of an adapter.
That was his 4th concussion. He wanted to go back to work.
We're proud. It was my identity.
But doctors told him he'd had too many injuries, and his 26-year career as a corrections officer was over. Most of the nearly dozen guards Target 2 talked to tell us they also suffered multiple injuries.
I had a broken jaw, tore 3 ligaments off my jaw, and a neck injury where I had to have my neck fused.
The threat of more injuries pushed Rick Process into early retirement after 28 years in corrections.
It just wasn't worth staying there and taking that risk of being there at that institution because of the things that had been going on, the assaults that had been occurring, and just the lack of care for staff and their well-being.
Target 2 filed open records requests and found 326 assaults on staff in the last year and a half at GBCI, Oshkosh, Waupun, and Dodge Correctional. We found 100 cases of battery, which included the attack on Officer O'Neill, 119 throwing assaults, which included the inmate who threw boiling water on a GBCI officer last summer, giving him 2nd and 3rd degree burns on 30% of his body. We also found 82 incidents of spitting, 5 sexual assaults, and 51 physical injury by contact. In many cases, inmates had more than one violation for each assault.
I've recognized a few of them. I'll say it's typically the same people, time and time again.
We found 59 inmates responsible for a majority of the attacks. So why so many? Every guard Target 2 asked lists multiple reasons. Some point to a 2015 law change in prisons which reduces the amount of time inmates can spend in segregation, where they're locked in a cell for 23 hours a day.
And if they can do it and increase their ranking in their gang and only have to spend 2 weeks in segregation, why not create a little chaos? They have nothing to lose.
Other officers tell Target 2 union support, eliminated by Act 10, left officers afraid to use force and without administration backing if they did, as well as fewer people wanting to work in corrections. The DOC tells Target 2 there are 16 vacancies at GBCI right now, compared to 33 a year ago. The department's secretary acknowledges the concerns, but tells Target 2 there are obvious challenges working in maximum security prisons.
We try to do everything we can to make them safe. I mean, the aspect is that the environments, especially in your maximum institutions, are challenging. There is no doubt about that. We feel that they are safe, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to always be vigilant.
The DOC tells us it's put several new programs in place to improve staff safety and security at GBCI in the last several months. The agency also just provided Target 2 with a lengthy and detailed list of ways it's helping address mental health concerns for inmates. Part of that includes more immediate treatment options through funding in the governor's proposed budget. We'll show you those and why the secretary is confident they'll make a difference Monday at 10.
WBAY TV, coverage you can count on. Action 2 News at 5 starts now.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Since our Target 2 investigation aired last week, revealing hundreds of assaults and attacks on prison staff in our area, we have been hearing from many of you.
Some are outraged at the kind and sheer number of incidents. Many others saying they or their loved ones left correction jobs out of fear of safety. Despite that, the Department of Corrections insists it is making safety and security improvements for staff and inmates. Sarah Thompson is following up on her investigation and joins us now with what she found. Sarah.
Cammie and Bill, the DOC acknowledges there is always a risk working in a maximum security prison, and many of the dozens of employees Target 2 talked with say they knew that going in. But they and many of you argue there is an expectation of safety that is not being met. Target 2 dug through nearly 2 years of assault records and found 326 incidents in less than 2 years where inmates attacked staff at 4 prisons in our area. We're hearing from some of you who no longer feel it's safe. One woman telling us, "My husband is retiring early." More writing, "Fearing your life isn't worth it, and I don't miss working for the DOC at all." Another former employee who worked in finance inside the prison says, "I worked for almost 20 years in the correctional institution setting. I transferred to another state agency. It just wasn't worth risking my safety any longer. I think it's only a matter of time before the situation becomes deadly." The Department of Corrections secretary tells Target 2 it's making significant improvements to safety, starting with equipment, adding more cameras, eliminating dead spots, and upgrading radios, sometimes one of the best weapons an officer can have.
We have evaluated all officer post movement to make sure that officers are in the best places to deal with the issues that may arise, not that have, but that may arise. And then we also look at offender movement. Are there places we should restrict offender movement? Should we try to reduce offender movement in a type of situation?
The secretary tells Target 2 there were also changes made in the kitchen area at Green Bay Correctional Institution after an inmate badly burned an officer with boiling water last summer. That and why the agency says it's now put a big focus on treating inmates' mental health, coming up tonight at 10.
From WBAY TV, coverage you can count on. Action 2 News at 10 starts now.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. In the last few days, we've heard from many viewers telling us you or family members have left jobs at Wisconsin's prisons concerned about safety amid violent inmate attacks.
Last week, Target 2 Investigates revealed more than 300 assaults on staff at 4 prisons in our area in less than 2 years. In some cases, corrections officers were severely injured and unable to work.
Many of you are asking what's being done to protect prison staff. Head of the Department of Corrections tells Sarah Thompson the agency is making improvements.
I think our institutions are safe and secure. I do think they're challenging environments, though.
Being a corrections officer inside a maximum security prison like Green Bay Correctional is not a typical nor easy job.
The worst of the worst in Wisconsin, day in, day out. And because it's mass movement, you're subject to danger every day. And because we know that not a lot of the population can do this job.
But Dennis O'Neill did for 26 years before an inmate attacked a doctor, then Dennis, when he jumped in to save her. After a brutal fight, the inmate knocked him unconscious and cut his head open with a makeshift weapon. While he wanted to return to work, doctors told him he couldn't.
Well, geez, I'm an officer.
Rick Process had a broken jaw and his neck fused after fights with inmates. He retired early, concerned for his safety.
You never know what you're going to encounter. Are they going to turn on you once you get there to a certain situation? Are they really after you, or are they planning this? Anything can happen.
Target 2 filed open records requests with the DOC for assaults on staff at 4 prisons, Green Bay, Oshkosh, Waupun, and Dodge Correctional, and found 326 assaults ranging from spitting to battery. Among those, what the DOC classified a throwing assault, where an inmate threw a 5-gallon bucket of boiling water on a GBCI corrections officer, leaving him with 2nd and 3rd degree burns and, according to a witness, his skin falling off.
That was the worst of the worst. That was the worst aggressive act that could possibly happen to an officer.
DOC Secretary John Litcher says he was distraught after hearing of the attack and tells Target 2 procedures were reviewed because of it.
I think all the methodologies and uses in the kitchen, because that happened in a kitchen environment, were reevaluated and assessed. And those that felt needed to be changed were changed. We have now put in, for example, security booths where they have to come through if they leave a kitchen or leave some types of certain areas, such that they can't leave with a potential weapon, such that it would beep. It would know, wait a minute, what's going on here?
When there's a serious assault, Secretary Litcher says he immediately reviews it.
Did the action we take, was that appropriate? Was our response appropriate? And what are we going to do from a standpoint of security and safety for anybody else that might come in contact with him or her?
Several corrections officers tell Target 2 they're worried for their own safety, arguing inmates are more violent, in part because of changes to prison penalties in 2015, reducing the amount of time inmates spend separated from others.
We are reducing our use of restrictive housing, but we are keeping restrictive housing and administrative confinement for our most combative type issues and situations.
Since 2015, the DOC says it's undergone substantial reforms, limiting most stays in restrictive housing, where inmates are separated from general population for less than 90 days, and provided programs to address problem behaviors.
I emphasize this to everyone. This is called the Department of Corrections. It isn't just the Department of Discipline. We want to correct the behaviors that we see.
Secretary Litcher says the agency is now closely reviewing whether mentally ill inmates should be placed in restrictive housing at all, or if they need other options. It's addressed in the state budget, too, with plans for more mental health providers at GBCI, Waupun, and Columbia, a diversion unit at Oshkosh for serious mental illness, and body cameras for officers posted in restrictive housing units.
We'll deliver more treatment right at the door front, if you would, and more immediate and more aggressive.
A big challenge, though, is finding staff willing to do the job, starting around $16 an hour.
I made less money the last 3 years that I was there.
While the DOC points to an 8.8% vacancy rate now compared to 18% a year ago, corrections officers argue there's significant turnover once new hires see what the job entails. Secretary Litcher believes there are improvements.
We feel very fortunate about our aggressive nature in recruiting officers to these positions. We feel we're making an impact on that. We think we're retaining more, and we think it will get better as we continue on. But we have made substantial progress in that area.
Some officers still employed in the prisons tell Target 2 they think progress is slowly being made, but believe there's a long way to go. Secretary Litcher tells Target 2 the department is continually evaluating safety and security for both staff and inmates. We've posted the budget proposals and statements from the DOC at WBAY.com.